as a journalist in this journey, I write everything down, and those are strategies that have helped me get through this. You know, I was told that this was about making wishes known, and when I got here, my wish was that the power go back on. Okay, so now you're getting it. What I want you to do is to learn to laugh and have humor. If you don't have humor, a disease or a death in the family or whatever it is going to take you down. Humor and faith and hope, which is what my journey and book is about, is part of the strategy of getting through the rough things in life. So I have to read from this. There was a time I could speak to 1,000 people for an hour without notes. I can't do this anymore, but I wrote this for you. I know the front line well in Alzheimer's. My maternal grandfather, my mother, my maternal uncle died of Alzheimer's, and before my father's death, he too was diagnosed with dementia. I'm the oldest boy in a family of 10, grew up outside New York City in Rye, New York, but I lived on Cape Cod a good part of my life, and my parents retired here, and I was the family caregiver. So I played both roles, the caregiver and the patient now. I remember when my dad was let go of the hospital, he wanted to let go, and I was both there at my parents' deathbed. They died 4 months apart, and I'll never forget, there was a screw-up at the last minute, and they couldn't get the morphine to him, and because I knew a lot of people in Orleans, I had to go to the CVS in Orleans and pick up his morphine and carry his death sentence up to his house, and I'll never forget that. And I wasn't even going to mention this today, but when I heard your story, it brought it back. So I've lived with this disease, and now Alzheimer's has come for me. I was diagnosed about 8 or 9 years ago with early onset Alzheimer's after experiencing the horrific symptoms of short-term memory loss, inability to recognize individuals and places I've known all my life, difficulty completing simple tasks, terrible judgment, confusion with time and place, hallucinations, withdrawal, problems with problem solving and special relationships. And after a battery of tests, brain scans, and a SPECT scan, confirmed the diagnosis, which doctors said was accelerated by 2 serious head traumas that I likely shouldn't have survived. One was a bike accident without a helmet, another was a car crash where my head cracked the windshield. There are probably a lot of jocks in this room here, but that you read about football and head injuries, and it will not cause Alzheimer's or dementia, but if you're predisposed, as the genetic loading is in my family, it will bring it on earlier. So as an investigative reporter, and I've written for papers around the country, I couldn't multitask, and it caused me to get an early diagnosis, and that's part of my journey now about getting people to get the early diagnosis. And so I probably ended up getting a diagnosis 10 years before I might have. I probably would, like many people, would have waited 10 years and suffered in fear, and that's what this disease is about. We need to bring this disease out of the closet, and it's a disease that can take 20 to 25 years, as you probably know. Not always, but the experts, world experts, will tell you that, to run its course, and the pathology can start without noticeable symptoms when you're in your 40s. So, like I said before, I may not have otherwise got a diagnosis until about now, and I may have another 10 or 15 years on this declining path, which kind of sucks, but it's life. There are no 2 patterns of Alzheimer's that are alike, and that confounds researchers, and it really complicates getting a cure, finding a cure. You know, Alzheimer's, and I have cancer too, you don't get Alzheimer's or cancer the day you're diagnosed. That just doesn't happen. You carry a disease for a while. So please don't be fooled about the stereotypes, inaccurate stereotypes of Alzheimer's. There are millions of individuals living with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia in the early stages, like me, still highly functioning, perhaps not even diagnosed yet, who are fighting off horrific symptoms daily beyond the observations of others. collectively, our minds in many ways are like iPhones. I turn mine off, by the way. You could laugh. You're going to make me feel good if you laugh, okay? Still sophisticated devices, but with a short-term battery that pocket dials and gets lost very easily. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'll never forget sitting in the neurologist's office outside Boston, side by side with my wife. Excuse me. It's always difficult talking about this and related to what you talked about. Of 43 years, Mary Catherine, listening to the diagnosis. Reading from his formal diagnosis in part, the neurologist noted, quote, an unusual situation of a bright man who had the opportunity to witness dementia in his parents with self-awareness of early symptoms within himself. His genetic loading is striking. The brain SPECT scan is the most compelling in the clinical context for Alzheimer's. The diagnosis has been made. I thought at the time I was falling into Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, where nothing would be what it is because everything would be what it isn't. What would be for me was devastating. I felt the tears running down the sides of my face. My eyes didn't blink. I reached for my wife's hand and said, what do we tell the kids? The communication part in this. The neurologist made it clear. I had to tell the kids, be honest. Tell them what you know. It was difficult. I'm the kind of guy like Evan who I don't want to know my timetable. I don't really care where some doctor says I'm on the curve. I just want this life to happen as long as I can, and I want to keep fighting and writing, because if I didn't, like Evan, I probably wouldn't have the will or the ability to stand up and talk to you today, even reading from notes. So I called a family convocation. 3 kids, Brendan, Colleen, and Connor, all nice Italian names. And under the guise that we're going to go out to dinner, and Brendan, who's a writer, producer in Boston, came down, and my daughter, Colleen, who teaches inner city kids in Baltimore and just gave us our second grandchild last week, came down, and my son Connor works with me. And but they wanted to go to dinner, and they know I'm always late, and I was late. But I was late because I was in the bathroom trying to figure out what the hell to say. It was almost like Luca Brasi at The Godfather, on the day of your daughter's wedding. And I could hear the kids, if you got kids, Dad, let's go. And so I came out. They just wanted to go to dinner, but that wasn't the purpose. And so I said, okay, who wants a drink? And Dad, let's get going, Colleen said. And Brendan and Connor nodded. And so I said, okay, I'm going to have a glass of red wine. Who wants one? It was just another delay, and the kids, eyes rolling, obliged. My wife, knowing the script, because we had talked about it, just interrupted and said, your father has something to tell you. So all eyes were in my direction, and stage fright has never been an issue for me, but the words were not flowing. I kept saying to myself, get to the freaking point. So I talked about the family tree, their great-grandfather, my grandfather, their grandmother, my mother, my father, their grandfather, their uncle too. And I said, I'm on the same course. And it was an awkward conversation, but my son Brendan said, well, Dad, that explains a lot. They had noticed. And this is part of the communication. This is what you were talking about. It was the elephant in the room, okay? But this elephant forgets now. And that was kind of a joke, but maybe I thought I might get a laugh out of that. But it was awkward. And so finally Connor, the youngest, broke the ice and said, so, Dad, you're losing your mind. And I said, I guess you could say so. And so with that, we went to dinner in East Orleans at the Barley Neck Inn and talked about the Patriots, Red Sox, Bruins, a little bit about Pluto and the Milky Way. It was about life going on, but there are always hiccups in communication. whether we're talking about cancer or Alzheimer's, dementia, or something else. And I thought we were kind of done. Robert Frost once observed, in 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on. Woody Allen, in a wry exchange in the movie Annie Hall, put an exclamation point on survival instincts with an anecdote about a guy who goes to a psychiatrist complaining that his brother thinks he's a chicken. When the doctor suggests he turns his brother in, the man replies, I would, but I need the eggs. So my family needs the eggs. So like Evan, I press on, sometimes against horrific progressions, to try to stay in the moment. So when I thought the communication was done, and maybe that's the point I'm trying to get to, because you had heard before what they went through, don't think it's a one-time communication. As Mark Twain once wrote, denial ain't just a river in Egypt, and it's the denial thing in this journey. So days later, we were headed to pastoral Coronado Island off San Diego. I don't know if you've ever been there, and for a family retreat. But in my notes, as I said, even in paradise, things can go awry when it comes to communication, the denial thing. As the great Roman Empire scribe Publius Renatus cautioned centuries ago, in times of peace, prepare for war. My son Brennan and I arrived early, and the first night the two of us stayed at the Coronado Island Marriott Resort overlooking San Diego Bay. And after a walk on the beach and a dinner and a beer, Brennan and I went back to the hotel, it's 2 of us, and there was still unfinished business between us. Brennan had no clue about what I need to talk to him about. Timing can be terrible, even on a flee from reality. There's no respect for timelines. I had brought with me all the signed legal documents naming Brendan my power of attorney, as I was the power of attorney for my own parents. Should something ever happen to my wife, all assets or anything left would be distributed through him to the kids. I was to have nothing, as the lawyers requested. When you're on this disease and Alzheimer's, there's a look back for a nursing home, so I own nothing now. Once again, I couldn't find the right words, so we walked back to the hotel, and I engaged him in a conversation on the second-floor balcony above what seemed to be a plantation of palm trees and tropical flowers. I showed him the documents, the legal documents. He wanted nothing to do with them. I don't want to talk about it, he shouted. I don't want to talk about it. But you gotta, I said. You have to, Brendan. You have to talk. You're the oldest boy, and you have to start acting like it. You need to get it. It was one of the most profound confrontations I've ever had with any of my children, and one I hope never to repeat. I showed him the documents again. He pushed them away. This is bullshit, Dad. This is fucking bullshit. And I apologize for the word, but that's exactly what he said. Fine. Then you need to see something else, I replied, opening the door to the hotel room and bringing out another pile of papers, about 50 pages of my medical records that really showed that I was losing my mind. Read them, I said as I waved the papers in front of his face. They're right here. We were both in rage. Brendan grabbed the papers and began to read. He stopped at a page that summarized the neurologist's finding. The diagnosis has been made, the doctor's report said. Mr. O'Brien is working off a blessing of cognitive reserve that could keep him focused for some time to come, but I'm not sure how long he has in terms of being able to reliably and meaningfully provide the quality of work that he has put in the past. It also might be helpful if his counselor would negotiate a more open discussion with his family so he suffers less isolation. Brendan was stunned. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. He yelled in primal anger. He ripped the documents in pieces and tossed them off the balcony. Chunks of paper, my personal naked and retching medical reports, fell among the palms like a blanket of snow. This is bullshit. That's what I think. It's bullshit. Louder and louder. His eyes were in tears. He paused to catch his breath and said, "It's bullshit, Dad. It's bullshit because I know it's true." He then fell into my arms and cried, both of us, like a baby. I couldn't sleep that night. And I woke up at first light to the realization, the horror, that my medical records, documentation that I was losing my mind, as Connor had politely pointed out, were now strewn among paradise, all throughout the tropical plants near the pool. So I grabbed a plastic trash bag, picked up as many pieces of my clinical test reports that I could, and my past and my future were now in the trash. Over the years, the trash has mounted in this disease, an ongoing progression. So where am I today? 60% of my short-term memory, at times, not always, can be gone in 30 seconds. More and more, I don't recognize people I've known all my life. That hallucinations are growing, the rage is increasing. I have a debilitating loss of filter, loss of self, and judgment in time and place. The body in Alzheimer's shuts down, and there were some similar points that you made about Evan, because he had the brain tumor and I had a brain disease. I have right now no feeling in my legs from my feet to my knees. It is neuropathy, but it's complicated by brain signals not connecting. I sustain blackouts, and there are times when I'm falling more and more now, often without notice. I have acute spinal stenosis and scoliosis, a condition accelerated by the breakdown of the body. And in addition to the prostate cancer I'm not treating, I just was diagnosed with skin cancer, and 2 days ago had stuff cut out. As they say in Boston, other than that, things are just pisser. Okay. All right, we're doing all right. So I try to walk in faith, hope, and humor. I'm getting near the end, but I think this faith, hope, and humor is important while the doctors race for a cure. You talk about strategies. I cut up a frog in high school, okay? I can't figure this shit out, but I could learn to walk in faith, hope, and humor. I will tell you that I'm the most perfect sinner in the world. I've committed every sin a man can commit, but murder and adultery, and I've been tested in both. There were, on the more serious point, there was twice that I tried to leave this planet prematurely, and I think you know what I'm talking about. And I talked to my doctor about it, the suicide thing, and my wife and my pastor, Doug Scalisi at Brewster Baptist. I'm an equal opportunity Christian. I also go to Our Lady of the Cape Catholic Church, so you Catholics just realize I still go to the Catholic Church. But he's the man I went to, and I was talking to him for advice. And this is good communication advice for all of us on the spiritual front of trying to fight something that we can't fight medically right now, because if it's terminal cancer or it's Alzheimer's, guess what, folks? There's no cure. Right now, there's no cure. So I went to see my pastor, and he quoted from Psalm 23, which maybe many of you know, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." And I think the verse speaks to all of us. It's primal advice for those dealing with disease and the caregivers. Doug says to me, you can't helicopter over this valley, Greg. You got to walk through it. Mountain hikers know this. The valley is dark, and often you can't see around the next corner. You just have to keep walking. Alone, I asked him? And Scalise, a man of considerable wisdom, points to a photo in his office. It's a flock of flying geese. There's a juxtaposition in the photo, and it appears the geese are flying past the moon. While we're all told in life to soar like eagles, Doug says, geese fly even higher in a flock V formation. It's a study in teamwork, he said. Geese in formation take turns in the lead, breaking the wind. Others in the flock draft off the lead, each bird honking encouragement and benefiting from the bird in front. They all take their turns at front, the hardest role. It's an exercise in leadership. No one is left alone, as it should be in life, as you understood with your husband. Doug then told me a story, which applies, I think, to all of us, of the carrot, the egg, and coffee beans in boiling water. A young woman, he tells me, went to her mother and told her about her life and how things were so hard for her. She didn't know how long she was going to be able to keep on making it, and she wanted to give up, and she was tired of fighting and struggling and wanted to give in, leave the planet. It seemed like one problem after another keep arising. Her mother took her to the kitchen. She filled 3 pots of water. In the first pot, she placed carrots. In the second pot, she placed eggs. In the third pot, she placed ground coffee beans, all in boiling water. She then let them sit and boil without saying a word, and after a while, she turned off the burners. She flushed the carrots out and placed them in a bowl. She pulled the eggs out and placed them in a bowl, and then she ladled some of the coffee into a mug. Her daughter asked, she turned to her daughter and said, "What do you see?" "Carrots, eggs, and coffee," the daughter replied. The mother brought her closer and asked her to feel the carrots. The daughter did and noted that they were soft. The mother asked her to take the egg and break it. After pulling off its shell, she observed the hard-boiled egg was that hard. Finally, the mother asked her to sip the coffee. The daughter smiled as she tasted the rich aroma. Then the daughter asked, "What's the point, Mom?" Her mother explained, Doug said, that each of the objects had faced the same adversity, boiling water, and each reacted differently. The carrot went in strong and hard and unrelenting. However, after being subjected to boiling water, it softened and became weak. The egg had been fragile. Its thin outer shell had protected its liquid interior, but after being through boiling water, its inside became hardened. The coffee beans were unique, however. After they were in the boiling water, they had changed the water. "Which are you?" the mother asked the daughter. "When adversity knocks on the door, how do you respond? Are you a carrot, an egg, or a coffee bean?" At that point, my pastor said, "What are you?" You know, in closing here, in the last year, I've lost 6 close friends to Alzheimer's. The demon is now multiplying around the room. Lots of spouses without mates, children without parents, grandchildren with fewer ones to hold on to. My good friend Steve Johansson wrote of this disease after his diagnosis and his progressions, pushing back on the stereotype of Alzheimer's that nobody can speak. That's the end stage. Quote, as Steve wrote, "I don't think I'll be at this desk much longer." And he died many months ago. I'm trying now to build a positive vision for the future. I've always been able to put together the pieces to build beautiful, safe places for my family and friends. I suspect my tools will lay unused and layered with ever-deepening layers of dust. But on a positive note, I know that my loved ones will pull me up from inaction, dust me off again, and take me out for fresh air, nature's beauty, and the hugs that we all need at some time in the future. Ken Sullivan, another close friend of mine who passed away, used to have beers with his good friend Paul Boyce after the diagnosis and ongoing progressions. They talked about Alzheimer's and how unfair it was, like the final scene in the movie Charlie, adapted from the book Flowers for Algernon. They talked about the day when Ken would not recognize Paul. "You won't see it coming," Paul said, "but I will." "I know," replied Ken. "I'll just be along for the ride." All of us in the room are along for the ride. It may be different vehicles, but folks, we're along for the ride. You know, perhaps Ernest Hemingway said it best when he observed, "The world breaks everyone, and afterwards some are strong in the broken places." Be strong in the broken places. God bless you.